everybody, welcome to the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast, the place where we just talk about AEW Dynamite, and I forget to actually have a movie reference ready for the beginning of this show. Let's ignore that. I am Griff from GA, and joining me today in our first two-man trip ever since the very first episode of the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast is Ryan over from Pro Wrestling Musings. You've heard him before. This is a really interesting one because we have the Dynamite after Double or Nothing. It's on a Friday, not in their usual time slot. So this is kind of a weird show to talk about, and it has definitely sparked debate among a lot of people about the quality of the show and whether or not AEW is kind of phoning it in. I guess we'll address that as we go, but I'm going to get my thoughts out of the way first off. I don't think they were phoning it in. I thought this was a pretty good episode of Dynamite, all things considered, and we will start where all good things start, and that is, of course, at the beginning with the Young Bucks versus Pac and Penta. This match, for me, it really grew on me as it went. At first, I wasn't a huge fan of it, but as the match went on, it really grew on me. Ryan, what did you think about our opening contest here?
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think it got better as it went on. I don't think it actually really kicked into second gear, but I think for what it was a decent match. Obviously, there's only so much you could do in a 10-minute time frame, you know? I think, especially in Pac's situation, he's a wrestler who you would want to have longer matches, especially considering that compared to the rest of the competitors in that match, he's definitely more of a methodical wrestler. With the Young Bucks and Penta to some degree, that's not really an issue. But overall, it was lacking, but only slightly. I think it was, once again, it was fine for what it was. I don't really have any complaints. Usually I have no problem ragging on the Young Bucks. I don't always get their matches, but this was fine. If you put this in Reseda, it would have been totally popular, you know?
Right.
So I definitely think it was the best match of the night. No real complaints, just the length was a little bit off, and I think that's why it never kicked into high gear for me.
Yeah, you make a good point about Pac, because it's really interesting. He has this style where he's super explosive. So he kind of will wrestle this very, I don't want to say slow, because that has a negative connotation, but methodical, deliberate kind of match. And then he'll just kind of kick it into high gear, and it's like something just snaps, and then suddenly Pac is working at 1,000 miles an hour, and the match is moving really quickly. So in a 10-minute match, it doesn't really work to do it that way, especially in a tag match. In a 10-minute singles match, you could do that, but in a 10-minute tag match, there's not enough time for him to establish that methodical part of the match and then kick it into high gear, which is fine. I mean, he's a great wrestler regardless. It's just a different story than we're used to seeing being told by Pac. The reason why it grew on me, I think, is when it started, I don't think it's a great idea to start a Dynamite with a pre-match brawl. And they don't usually, but I think in this instance, I don't think it really worked, because the problem is I was ready to see this match between these four guys that I really like, and we kind of have to have the whole thing delayed by this brawl, and it's like, it didn't get me into the mood that I needed to be in to watch this match immediately, even though the match itself ended up, in my opinion, being really good. The other thing, and I haven't actually seen anyone talk about this, so maybe I'm reading too much into it, but the thing that I do really like about the Young Bucks is they make all these references to these past wrestlers and teams, and a lot of them are really good, and I really liked it. I mean, I praise them for doing the WrestleMania 24 spot with the Shawn Michaels saying, "I'm sorry, I love you," and all that kind of stuff. I loved it when they did that. This may be me reading too much into it, but I thought that briefly at the beginning of the match, Matt was doing a Shawn Michaels SummerSlam 2005 impersonation. Like he just got, I think he got lawn darted into the top rope, and he sold it like he had just been hit with a sledgehammer. And so maybe that's just what he wanted to do or something, but it didn't work for me. I don't like that reference, because Shawn Michaels at that time, yeah, it was funny, but it was also really unprofessional and made the whole thing look like a joke. And so to reference a non-kayfabe thing. Like, he did that in kayfabe because of something that had happened outside of kayfabe, Michaels did. So to reference that, it didn't work for me. So if that's what he was going for, it took me out of the match for the first few minutes. And that's why it grew on me, because as they started to get into the meat of the match and actually wrestle with these 4 world-class wrestlers, that's when it got me back into it and reminded me, oh yeah, the Young Bucks actually are probably the best tag team in the world. They don't need to do all that kind of wacky stuff. So I don't know, maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Did you see any of that? Did you catch that reference?
Well, I didn't catch that reference, but before I even go into that, I just want to say I actually think the brawling at the beginning of the match really brought me in, because if they had just started off with the match and not done all of the pre-match shenanigans, I don't think I would have gotten into it as much. I remember when it was the Young Bucks versus Pac and Rey Fenix, it started off so slow, and it took forever to really get into it. And that was my main critique of that match. In this case, you kind of start off kind of crazy with all this brawling, all of this shenanigans. I really think that helped draw me in, so that the more methodical stuff at the beginning of the actual match wouldn't be so bothersome, I guess. Mm-hmm. But that's just my thing. I don't know. I totally understand what you're saying, though. Now, when it comes to the Young Bucks and their references, I didn't catch the Shawn Michaels one, but I did see one that might be a Braun Strowman reference. Did you get that, where he runs out of the ring, runs all the way around the ring, and rams into his opponent?
Is that what that was? I had no idea what that was, but you're right. That is...
I don't know for sure, but I saw that on Twitter, and I thought it was interesting that they would do that. I don't know whether that's actually supposed to be about Braun Strowman, and if it is, I don't know why they did it. Maybe just to stir the pot. I really don't know. But I thought it was pretty funny, honestly.
That's interesting, because I was actually wondering what that spot was. And I was like, did he just forget something? Is he like... I thought he was making fun of Pac, because Pac has, like... When he kicks it into high gear, he starts running all over the place, and so I thought that's what he was making fun of. But that actually makes a lot more sense for him to do the Braun Strowman thing. So that's interesting, and it actually leads really well into the next segment of Dynamite, where we get this huge debut, and this is a really interesting one, I think. Former WWE wrestler, now of course, actually 2 former WWE wrestlers, but one of them making a big debut. So we go into the ring, we talk with Mark Henry, and the funny thing about Henry, when they first announced him to be on the commentary team for Rampage, the most I have seen of Henry over the last couple years has been mostly appearances in documentaries and things like that, whether it's, WWE 24s, or I think he had a lot of spots on, what's that called? Ruthless Aggression, the Ruthless Aggression series. And right. He sounded like really low energy, and I was like, oh, is that what I want on Rampage? But looking back, I realized that, once he actually has something he can sink his teeth into, and you look back at his promos, it's the same thing. So I just forgot how passionate he can sound if he actually cares. And so in this promo, he definitely did. And it's funny that they immediately teased him getting back in the ring, because I think at this point, AEW knows that that's what everyone's thinking whenever anyone comes, and they said the same thing about Paul White. Is he going to wrestle again? I don't really care if Henry does wrestle again or not. I mean, after having seen Sting at Double or Nothing, I kind of feel like if he wants one more match, give it to him, because I know that it's going to be done the right way. But I don't know. I think the more I hear from Mark Henry, I like him being on the commentary team. I mean, do you have any thoughts about Henry going to Rampage?
It's not what I expected. I know that when he stopped wrestling in WWE, he was doing a lot of recruiting, especially recruiting people who weren't previously in wrestling to become wrestlers, like Bianca Belair being one of them. So I think him being involved in Dynamite is going to be really interesting, and I hope he brings more people not necessarily involved in wrestling into wrestling,
Yeah.
more athletes outside of the wrestling industry. I think he could be pretty awesome in that role, considering the fact that he found Bianca Belair,
Yeah.
As a commentator, I never really thought about him being in that role, but I think that if Paul White could do it so effectively, why can't Mark Henry? I think about back in 2011 when he was doing the Hall of Pain stuff, and he's so clearly passionate about it when, like you said, when he has something to sink his teeth into. And then you think about that retirement promo. Oh my God. He's such a great talker. And even though we haven't seen him in a commentary role that I'm aware of, I still think that he's capable. And even if he's not way too capable at the very beginning, he's going to fall into it very well. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what he has to offer. I'm really wondering, though, how Rampage is going to separate itself from the other shows. Because by the sounds of it, it sounds like it's going to be Dynamite Light, honestly. So what's really going to separate the two shows? That's what I'm most intrigued about.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the fact that they're talking about Rampage this much and, introducing a commentary team 2 months from when the show's going to debut, I think they know that people are going to be asking that exact question. How is Rampage going to be different? What are we going to see? Why should I tune in on a Friday night? That kind of thing. Which is definitely fair, because even for me as a huge AEW fan, I'll watch Rampage, even if it's just an hour of replays from Dynamite, I'll still watch it. But there is going to be a serious question about, what is it and why would we watch it? So I wonder if it's going to be kind of this slow trickle of information, because AEW does not have a history of announcing something and then just kind of letting it sit for a long time without ever referencing it again. Sure. I guess at times, they've done that, but every wrestling company does that. So I would expect that we'll get something as we get closer to Rampage. Obviously, though, the noteworthy part of this segment was, first of all, Vicky Guerrero coming out, and I didn't realize that Vicky still has as much heat as she does. But as soon as she came out yelling, "Excuse me," that was one of the loudest pops of the night from the fans. And they didn't know what she was coming out to do, right? So it wasn't even the pop for the man she was about to introduce. It was the pop for her. And that, to me, was pleasantly surprising. I think it's cool that she still has that heat. And I hope that they can actually use it a little bit better, and maybe they will. We'll talk about that later. But, of course, she does come out with a purpose, and she does end up introducing Andrade El Idolo. And to me, this is a really interesting one, because we knew he had already existed in the AEW kayfabe universe, right? Because he, a couple weeks ago, had challenged Kenny Omega for the AAA World Mega Championship, which in kayfabe in AEW, Kenny Omega does hold. So therefore, Andrade already exists in kayfabe in AEW. So it's like it's a debut, but not really. It's really interesting. And Andrade, first of all, the first thing that came to my mind is this guy speaks pretty good English. Why did he never cut a promo in WWE? Zelina's great. Zelina Vega is great. But how did Andrade never talk in WWE? This guy cuts a great promo. I'd heard him cut promos in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, but I knew he was a great promo just listening to his voice. But, if the guy can speak English, have him cut promos. And he cut, I think, a really good one. In 2 sentences, he justified himself being there and made me really excited to see him. It definitely seems like this isn't just a one-off thing where he's going to fight Kenny Omega, and so sometimes he's going to be on TV. AEW put out the graphic, and they said Andrade's all elite and all that kind of stuff. So it seems like he's actually here in AEW to do something. So my question to you is, what is his role going to be now?
Well, first off, I think he definitely has to win the AAA Mega Championship at Triple Mania,
Yep, I
which
agree.
that's going to be an excellent match. I think overall that's going to be a wild show because, not to digress, I think this show is kind of opening the forbidden doors in ways not necessarily seen, because not only do we have AEW guys on there, we're going to have some Impact wrestlers on there, such as Deonna Purrazzo fighting for the women's championship. So that's going to be interesting to see how all that plays out overall. Now, when it comes to Andrade, I agree. I think he is a pretty awesome promo. Something that I'm finding kind of, I don't know if it's funny or whatever, but as of late, we've been seeing a lot of wrestlers who have not cut a lot of promos in English cutting pretty great promos in English. Like Hikaru Shida, not only during the episode of Dynamite before, but also during the Double or Nothing pre-match packages. And now we have Andrade speaking pretty great English on live TV in a way that should have allowed him to speak on TV while he was working for WWE. I think the fact that he is going to be allowed to actually talk shows that AEW has trust in him, clearly. I think it's wild that... I don't know if I find it wild. I think it's cool that they're going the anti-WWE route by not necessarily giving him the mouthpiece like Zelina Vega was. I guess to some extent, Vicky Guerrero is going to be his mouthpiece, but clearly he's not going to need a mouthpiece to the Zelina Vega extent that WWE made us think that he needed.
Right.
So I think it'll be cool to see how he navigates those waters, how his presentation overall will change. I think the recent news about his contract and the fact that he's going to have some creative control built into his contract, I think that is going to definitely alter his image compared to his image in other wrestling companies, whether it's WWE or CMLL before that. That alone, without even seeing the guy, I think that shows you that he has star power, regardless of what you think about that clause in his contract or not. I think that itself shows that he's gonna go into this having some star power, right?
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see how I don't expect him to go straight into the title scene, but sooner than later he's gonna end up fighting for AEW titles, whether it's the top title, the TNT title, whatever. I'm sure he's gonna be one of the top dogs soon enough.
Yeah. This is where I think AEW has to establish right now that their commitment to allowing their wrestlers to work other places and work other dates is going to be a lasting feature of the company. I don't think AEW should, look at this and say, well, we're just going to allow these wrestlers to do this until we're big enough to, sign them to enough money that they'll be exclusive to us. No, this AEW has to allow people like Andrade to go elsewhere. And the reason why that's so important is because the reason why WWE had such issues with so many of these people is that they had all of these people exclusively and didn't use any of them, or didn't use a lot of them. But from WWE's perspective of things, the people who they did use, people also liked. I mean, they weren't using Andrade, but people loved Drew McIntyre. I mean, he was so over when he was building up to challenge Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. Brock Lesnar himself, whatever you think about his booking, he is still mega over, probably the biggest star they have. Roman Reigns, same thing. So WWE had this embarrassment of riches. And so for all of us who are fans of the independent scene and some of these smaller, quote unquote, smaller promotions, we want to see those guys get used. But there's also a bunch of guys getting used in WWE that people also like. So AEW could very easily run into that same problem if they continue to bring in this number of people. The way you fix that is you allow them to go elsewhere. So from Andrade's perspective, if he's going to come into AEW, give him a feud, and then, like I say, I agree. I think he probably will and should win the AAA Mega Championship. So allow him to go to AAA and just work there full time. So he doesn't need to be on Dynamite every week. He doesn't need to be competing for AEW titles yet. Let him do what he's going to do in AAA. And then when eventually they transition the title off of him, he can come back when AEW is ready to actually put him in a higher program on the card, maybe give him a title or something like that. And when you look at some of the people coming down the pike for potentially AEW, people that I have said they need to go out and sign like yesterday, people like Samoa Joe and Tommy End, that it's going to be the same thing with them. You know, if you bring them in, either they're going to have to be catapulted to the top of the card immediately, or you have to allow them to go other places so they can be off AEW but still in front of wrestling fans somewhere. Because we saw this issue specifically with Miro, right? Miro comes in and everyone's really excited about him, but they didn't really get the ball rolling on him for a couple months. Now, obviously they did eventually, and now Miro is super over. But originally there was a lot of criticism about the way they were using Miro. So AEW just has to be careful about that. In Andrade's case, I think exactly the way you do it, bring him in, give him a feud against, I don't know, Lance Archer maybe, or someone who's kind of in that area, someone who has fought for the TNT Championship. I mean, if you really want to hotshot him, give him a feud against Cody, I guess. But we'll talk about his involvement later on. You know, but I think that's what you do. I think you give him a feud, introduce him to AEW fans, and then you can kind of send him away, in a manner of speaking, to AAA, let him win that title, let him be champion over there, and he doesn't have to be on AEW all the time. You can bring him in a couple times, but, you know, I think that's really important for AEW. If they want to have all these people, you can't allow fans to feel like all these people are just sitting in catering doing nothing, because fans will get frustrated really quickly, as we've seen.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty wild the way that AEW does that, because it feels inconsistent to me. The fact that they have certain stars go wherever, but certain stars haven't appeared anywhere except for AEW television, you know? So, like, guys like Kenny Omega, he's wrestling in Mexico a little bit, not crazy amount of dates, but he's wrestling a few dates because he's AAA Mega Champion, obviously. But then you got guys like Brian Cage, who have actually wrestled a lot on the independents since signing with AEW. What I'm wondering is, why haven't guys like Hangman Page, for example, gone to wrestle elsewhere? Is it just a matter of the fact that he's been involved in feuds in AEW since the get-go? Or, like, what's happening there? Because then you have guys like Jack Evans, who I feel like should, if he's not going to be a bigger deal on AEW television, then so many other wrestling companies would be willing to use him, you know? So why aren't they allowing him to go elsewhere? Or is he just content staying with AEW doing what he's doing?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm curious about how all that works.
Yeah, and, you know, it's very possible that some of these guys, like you brought up Hangman, maybe he doesn't want to work other dates. Maybe he's really comfortable just, you know, working for AEW. I don't want to speculate about what he wants to do or whatever. I'm just saying, if there are guys out there that feel like they want to work just AEW and, you know, pretty much be exclusive, then that's great, you know. And I think it may end up being kind of a natural progression where, as you feel that you are getting pushed in AEW more, you start to prioritize them, because, I mean, there's an argument now for them to potentially be the second or third biggest wrestling company in the world, and if they grow at the trajectory they seem to be, then it certainly seems like they will be the undisputed second biggest wrestling company in the world before very long. So it might be like, you know, you sign for AEW, but they allow you to work all these other dates, And then, as you do that, you start to get more and more of a look by AEW management, and as they trust you more, then you start being more exclusive to AEW as they begin to push you more. So it might be a situation like that. And then in the situation of Jon Moxley, he did that basically in reverse. He was doing exclusively AEW and some New Japan, and when he was AEW World Champion, that was most of what he did, with a couple New Japan dates sprinkled in. And then the pandemic obviously stopped him doing the New Japan dates, and so he was just working AEW as the World Champion. And now the wrestling world is opening, and Moxley is no longer the champion. Now he's working all of these other dates, right? And so he's like feuding with Nick Gage on these indies and GCW and places like that. Which, by the way, if you didn't see, there was this really cool spot in GCW where they had these like zombie things that were attacking Nick Gage, and one of them started doing the Jon Moxley walk, and everyone popped, and it turns out it was Matt Cardona and he attacked Nick Gage. That was really cool. I don't know if you saw that, but that was sick.
I love that. That's so funny. I never expected them to actually get in the ring and have this feud. I mean, but obviously this all started online. I kind of thought it would just stay online, because how different are those two wrestlers? The former Zack Ryder and Nick Gage, who almost died during a death match.
Exactly. Didn't he actually die? I feel like he did die, and then they like resuscitated him or something, like whatever. But
he was so close to dying during one of the matches.
Yep, you're right.
I don't know. He was super close.
Yeah. Either way, it's just funny to think about, Zack Ryder, Long Island Ice, the guy with, the Wrestling Figures podcast, fighting Nick Gage, the king of the death match. Like, that's ridiculous. Anyway, that's the kind of thing that I think Andrade finds really enticing about going to AEW, that they will allow him to do things like that. And I think from AEW's perspective, that should be actually one of their real selling points, that they'll allow wrestlers to go do that, because it helps them, one, attract a lot of wrestlers who, as we saw in the case of Andrade and several more coming out of WWE now. Again, I will mention guys like Daniel Bryan, Samoa Joe, Tommy End, guys like that, who at one point did do the whole touring thing and performed all over the world, and then they became exclusive to WWE, and now they've been in the company long enough where the whole wrestling landscape has changed from when they got in to now when they're getting out. So AEW actually would have a really, really big selling point to these guys if they say, hey, you want to go back to that time where you were touring the world and you could work with all these different people and stuff, we'll allow you to do that, and we'll pay you a lot of money to do it. So for me, it's a win-win. So I hope that's what we see from Andrade, so that we don't get a lot of complaints of people saying, well, Andrade's just sitting and catering. What's he doing for AEW? That kind of thing. I mentioned Cody Rhodes earlier. He was in a match. He teamed up with Big Shotty Lee Johnson, and they took on QT Marshall, Anthony Ogogo. Obviously, the joke, I love Anthony Ogogo. We all know. This match I thought was pretty good. I think QT Marshall is really solid. I think he's really good at what he does. And he's a really good heel, which is not something I expected to see from him when I first saw him on AEW. Lee Johnson, I think, is great. I think he might have been the breakout of this match, just in terms of every time he's on TV, he's doing some really cool stuff, and he's got that, really like white hot fire babyface kind of character, which is cool, because he really sells it well, and it is hard to play that character, I think, to be the super fired up babyface, because a lot of people actually complained about it with the Young Bucks. We were talking about earlier, where the Young Bucks tried to do that, and a lot of people were like, oh, you're kind of overselling it, you're kind of overacting a little bit. That was a common criticism of them when they were babyfaces. Lee Johnson is just kind of effortless, the way that he plays a babyface, so I really like that. This match was, I believe, the second match in a row that featured a distraction. This one actually led directly to the finish. I think the last one did too with the Bucks. But Ogogo just punches out Cody, and QT gets the pin. This makes a lot of sense. If Ogogo hits you in the jaw, you're not going to get back up, so that one makes sense to me. I don't know if they necessarily needed the distraction, because referees in AEW don't disqualify illegal men for hitting legal men. So, I don't know why you needed the distraction, but either way, I think the result was good. It'll continue this feud. Ryan, when you look at this, are you still interested in seeing this feud play out the way it seems to be?
It's interesting because it almost feels like the way this match went down is almost a retcon in a way. With all the shenanigans and all the distractions, that's exactly why I was hoping for the Double or Nothing match between Ogogo and Cody Rhodes. So the fact that they're doing it now feels a little bit backwards to me. AEW has this problem, has had this problem a few times where they simply do things backwards, like having the Stadium Stampede match after the Blood and Guts match, for example. But yeah, once again, this is one of these matches that, for what it was fine. Nothing really blew me away. It accomplished its goal, basically. Anthony Ogogo looked good. QT Marshall has improved tremendously. I mean, he was a wrestler before AEW, but once he signed to AEW and really started wrestling again, he wasn't all that great. So the fact that he is where he is now, props to him, because he's definitely improved. And like you said, Lee Johnson is pretty great. I don't think this was his breakout match by any means, but it was a good showing from him. I'm not entirely interested in this feud anymore, just because I don't know what the point is anymore. We had this rivalry between the Factory and the Nightmare Family that really the Nightmare Family started off winning this thing. But now the Factory is seemingly catching up with this win. It doesn't feel it doesn't feel earned. The Factory probably should have been winning the matches from the beginning instead of the Nightmare Family winning, and now the Factory has to catch up. I guess I understand it from a storyline perspective, because you got some relatively new wrestlers. I don't want to say totally new, because Aaron Solo has been wrestling for a while now. Camarado has been around for a little while. Anthony Ogogo is really the only new wrestler.
Right.
So, but it just feels so backwards to me. I don't really see where they're going with this. I'm not really interested anymore, which is a shame, because at one point it was the most interesting thing happening in wrestling. But They just kind of overdid it, did things backwards, and now we're just stuck in a place where okay, whatever, what happens next? Let's move on. So I don't know. It's sad. I hope all the wrestlers in this feud continue doing good things, because obviously they're trying. They're putting in the work to make this as good of a feud as possible, but the very feud itself is kind of failing them at this point, if you ask me. I don't know.
No, I definitely understand where you're coming from. I think the word outdid is or overdid is what you said, and to me that really encapsulates what's going on with this, and it feeds actually my suspicion that something happened with the scheduling of Double or Nothing that we don't know about, that's never been reported on. But this isn't the only feud that feels like it was completely hot-shotted for Double or Nothing and just came totally out of nowhere. I mean, there's several of them. And you mentioned the Inner Circle and Pinnacle Stadium Stampede was another one where it just felt like everything happened so quickly. So I have a suspicion that something happened with the scheduling of Double or Nothing that kind of surprised AEW and they had to rework some things. That's complete speculation on my part. But I do think the story started well, and what happened was AEW wanted to establish characters. And so immediately they wanted to establish Anthony Ogogo as a British patriot, right? He's a heel, he's part of the Factory, but he as a person, as a human being, loves the UK. And Cody Rhodes, same thing. He's a babyface, part of the Nightmare Family, but he as a person loves being an American, right? And that you were trying to establish those two characters, which is fine because we should have character in our wrestling, right? I mean, Anthony Ogogo's character shouldn't just be member of the factory, right? He should have a personality. And that's what I loved so much about him from the early going is he did have a personality. I knew who he was. And part of that personality was British Patriot. But the problem is at first it was very subtle. Right, he had the flag. He wore the kind of what we would think of as traditionally kind of posh British outfits, where he had like the bowler cap and he had the white collared shirt and everything like that. So there was nods to his character, and he would say things like in his very first promo, he said, "This isn't Great Britain, this is shitty America," right? So it's like very kind of small things like that really clued you in about who he is and what his character is like. All of which I really, really liked. The problem is I think AEW said, okay, so we need to establish that Anthony Ogogo is a British patriot, Cody's an American patriot, so let's just give him a feud based around that. And I don't think they had to do that. I think the story itself was there, and just their personalities, they as people are a British and American patriot. That's who they are. So I think AEW did make a mistake with that because it did dilute from the story that they were telling, even though the actual match itself at Double or Nothing I did like. The promos leading into it I did like. I just think it took away from the story that they should have been telling. And so it means that when they now return to the factory versus the Nightmare Family, especially with Anthony Ogogo having lost that match at Double or Nothing, now you're kind of building from scratch again. So I think that was kind of a self-inflicted wound from AEW. I think they moved too fast with that particular feud. And I also think just in general in wrestling, it's a lot more difficult to build a heel from the ground up than to build a babyface. It's easier to keep a heel on top than it is to keep a babyface on top. And when it comes to building, the problem is the heel either has to dominate every match they're in, and so that's an easy way to build. But if you do that all the time, then it gets boring. So right now, Miro's doing that. They're building him as a main card heel by just having him dominate everyone, which is fine because it works for Miro. But then you can't do the same thing with the factory because then it just gets boring. So with a babyface, it's really easy because you can have them get dominated by a number of opponents, and then they can always make their comeback and win, and that's how you build a babyface. So it's pretty easy. But with a heel, it's a lot more difficult. You have the booking around building heels is much more difficult because heels normally can lose and be okay, but when you're building them, they can't always lose and be okay. So whether or not Anthony Ogogo is okay after that loss to Cody, we'll have to see. I think that's something that we'll learn as time goes by. I think he'll be fine because he impressed so many people with his performance. Because I mean, let's remember this: is he perfect? No, but is this his fourth match? Yeah. So I think for a fourth match for Ogogo, he's pretty damn impressive for what he's doing. So I think for him, just be patient. It certainly seems that AEW views him as a big star potentially in the future. But I totally agree with you. With this story, it just feels like they muddy the waters a bit with hot-shotting that Cody Ogogo feud right to a Double or Nothing match. So now they're kind of picking up the pieces from that. And in the main event, which I guess we'll just talk about now because we're on the subject, of course, we saw Dustin Rhodes and Nick Comoroto in a bull rope match. Now, I thought this was pretty good. I thought Dustin, for his age, the bumps that he took and how well he was able to fare in this match against a much younger, much more athletic Nick Comoroto, I thought he did really well, and Dustin is just a great wrestler. He just knows professional wrestling. So credit to him for that. But this one, there were a lot of people that were making the argument that said, well, Anthony Ogogo didn't have to beat Cody Rhodes. It doesn't really matter. Cody's always going to be booked strong, so, don't worry about this one. So that's all fine. But Dustin is not booked strong like Cody. He's not booked like a main carder. So for Dustin Rhodes to win this match, to me, I'm like, why would you have this match if Comoroto's not going to win it? Like, wouldn't this be the first real shot fired from the factory to the Nightmare Family? Like, the booking here I really didn't get. I mean, Ryan, do you feel like Do you agree with me and feel like Camarado should have won this match, or is there any reason that Dustin should have gone over here?
No, I 100% agree with you. I definitely think Nick Camarado should have won this for exactly the reasons you gave. If we're going to have the factory finally take a shot at them, then let's have them start winning matches. You know, even though Dustin Rhodes is a really good wrestler, still, it definitely wasn't necessary for him to win at all. That's another reason why I'm confused about the booking. Compared to the Anthony Ogogo QT Marshall match, the fact that they won then and not before, it's backwards. And now the fact that we have Dustin Rhodes winning is also kind of backwards. You know?
Yeah.
The match itself, it was nothing crazy bull rope to begin with. I have a bunch of bull rope matches pulled up on cagematch.net. So I'm seeing Cody Rhodes versus Jay Lethal. I didn't think that was a great match. Eddie Guerrero versus JBL. It was one of their weaker matches.
I actually really like that match, but that's just me. That's my personal opinion.
I prefer their first match, the infamous one.
That's
the
definitely
one, the crazy blade job.
Yeah. Speaking of someone
Alberto
almost dying
El
during a
Patron,
death match.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Alberto El Patron versus El Tejano Jr. at Lucha Underground.
Mm-hmm.
Lex Luger versus Stan Hansen. You'd expect more from a Stan Hansen match, but whatever.
Yeah.
So the stipulation itself has never really worked all that well for me. So maybe that is one of the reasons why I disliked this match in particular outside of the booking itself.
Mm-hmm.
Nick Camarado is such a tall dude. He's such a big dude. I mean, Dustin Rhodes is a tall guy too, but Camarado very clearly has an advantage. Even if he doesn't have the experience advantage, he definitely has the size advantage. He definitely has the weight advantage. Overall, it feels unlikely that if this were a real fight, which obviously it wasn't, but if this was a real fight, you would have the younger and bigger Nick Camarado win the match.
Right.
Yeah, it just felt very off. A weird way to end the episode too. I feel like if they had Camarado win in the end, it could have been almost in the same vein as Brody Lee winning the TNT Championship at the end of that episode of Dynamite. Just have the heel at the end standing tall with all of their teammates, showing who's boss, basically. That would have been a cool way to end, but instead, it's easy to have the good guy win in the end, no matter how deserving or undeserving they are. So this felt like almost like the easy way out to send the fans home happy, but that's not always necessary because I don't know. It's not always necessary to do that.
Well, the weird thing is AEW doesn't always do that. That's not part of their, consistent philosophy, especially when it comes to Dynamite. Like doing it on Double or Nothing, that is totally understandable, and they should have done that, and it ends up being this great moment. But on Dynamite, that has not been part of their philosophy this whole time. They are more than willing to have heels go over in main events and have big moments like Brody Lee beating Cody and beating the hell out of the entire Nightmare family, that kind of thing. So I think you easily could have done a callback to that. But even if you didn't want to go in that particular direction, what's wrong with having Camarado win? Like, I'm just struggling to see the upside here. I can see the upside of having Cody go over against a Go-Go. I thought it was a mistake. I would have had a Go-Go win. But I can see the upside because ultimately someone from the factory is going to beat Cody, I would presume. And so whoever that is, if it is a Go-Go or if it ends up being QT Marshall himself, Cody's just going to look that much more deadly, and the moment's going to be that much bigger given the history. So I can at least understand where they're coming from. Cody this whole time has been built as the best wrestler from the Nightmare family. So that's fine. But Dustin hasn't. So why did we need to do this? That's just what I'm wondering. I just don't see the upside here. It's not like Dustin Rhodes is going to end up, winning the TNT championship or something. It's not like we're building him to be a champion or something. I hope. I mean, I love Dustin Rhodes, but come on. He's
right.
He's over the hill for that now. I mean, he's great for who he is and how old he is, right? I mean, but when your champions are Kenny Omega, Miro, and the Young Bucks, not a whole lot of room for 55-year-old Dustin Rhodes or however old he is. He's in his 50s. So, which is fine. He provides so much else to that company. So I just feel like, he has a great match, and I agree with you. The history of bull rope matches, they tend not to be great. I mean, Dustin's been in a couple good ones. I think he had one with Stan Hansen as well, if I remember correctly. I might be misremembering that. But he's been in 17 of them, and a couple of those have been good. So, I think this was a pretty good bull rope match for what it was, and, have Camarado go over. I don't really see, but I mean, if one of you out there sees something that we're not seeing, a reason why they would do this, then, comment if you're on YouTube or tweet us, whatever you want to do. Just cause I do want to know the counter argument to this. Cause I don't see one personally why Dustin would have gone over here. Either way, I did think it was a pretty good match. For being a bull rope match, I thought it was pretty solid, especially given the fact that Dustin is in his 50s working this match. So that has to be taken into account as well. There were two big kind of celebrations on this show, and they were both, I thought, very different, which made both of them effective. So we'll start with the Inner Circle. I think they called it the Victory Lap, the Stadium Stampede Victory Lap. And this was it was really basic stuff. I mean, there was nothing crazy here. It was all 5 guys got to cut a promo. All 5 guys are great promos, which to me is kind of the biggest revelation of the Inner Circle, is that it turns out that all 5 of these guys can cut great promos. And it started with just Jericho. And then, we start to learn that Proud and Powerful, they can cut a pretty good promo. And now suddenly Hager can cut a good promo. And finally now Sammy has really come into his own, and he's able to cut good promos as well. Which to me is really impressive that all 5 of these guys have really put the work in to be able to do that. And this was pretty much exactly what you thought it would be. It was them celebrating. They got the whole crowd to sing Judas again, which will never get old in my opinion. So that's fine. The more you want to do that, that's fine. Proud and Powerful, great promo from them. Sammy thanks the fans. Hager challenging Wardlow to an MMA cage match. That is really interesting. And then Jericho, of course, finishing it off saying, we're not done with the Pinnacle, and I believe that this is what's finally going to set up the individual matchups that we've seen brewing this whole time. So eventually Proud and Powerful and FTR are going to fight Sammy Guevara and Shawn Spears, Hager, Wardlow, and then, of course, Jericho and MJF. So I think that's what this was designed to do. Pretty simple. I thought it was really effective because of the promo work of all 5 of these guys. What did you think about the Victory Lap?
Yeah, I'm getting kind of sick of the Inner Circle, honestly. This Victory Lap just showed to me that they're not willing to let this feud go. More than anything, even though some of the matchups that they teased are definitely intriguing, it didn't feel all that genuine to me. It just felt like they were going out there just to do the heelish thing of hogging the spotlight, honestly. It's such a weird situation because once again, I thought that this feud has been pretty backwards, and you have your reasons why you think with the scheduling, possibly, who knows.
Again, total speculation on my part.
Yeah, just to make that clear, it's not anything confirmed or anything, but it feels odd to have these individual matches. Well, you know what? Now that I think about it, it's not totally odd to have the individual matches go on last. If these individual matches are gonna demolish the Inner Circle, it makes sense for the singles matches and the tag team matches to happen after the Blood and Guts and the Stadium Stampede. Mm-hmm. if this doesn't end with if each member of the Pinnacle winning their matches and the Inner Circle disbanding, then this feud officially doesn't make any sense to me. It's such a weird feud to me, even though because there's so many good parts of both factions, but as a whole, it just doesn't really work anymore. I would much rather see Ortiz and Santana out on their own instead of acting as Chris Jericho's bodyguards, essentially. I would much rather see Wardlow go out on his own. Maybe not out on his own, but like not behind MJF the entire time.
Yeah.
I would like him
be able to do more for himself.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously the fans are still liking this feud, so maybe I'm just wrong. I don't know. I view this feud as detrimental to both groups just because it feels like it's dragging on for so long.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's maybe I'm just upset about this episode of Dynamite as a whole because of how much of a drop in quality it is compared to some of even the more mediocre episodes of Dynamite. And maybe that's why I'm just being hypercritical of everything happening. But no, it didn't feel effective. It didn't feel genuine. It didn't feel like it had any purpose besides just getting them on screen.
I definitely see where you're coming from with that. I'll disagree with you about it not feeling genuine. I think all five of them did cut really good promos, in my opinion. So that part of it did work for me. But again, I mean, that's totally personal. It just depends on, your particular involvement with this story and how you feel about it and whatever else. But I do absolutely agree that it does. A lot of this feels disjointed. And a lot of it, like the way that I would have done it, I think a lot of people would have liked to see it. I would have done Stadium Stampede, then do all the individual matches, and then finish with Blood and Guts, and that's what eventually breaks up the Inner Circle. That's what I would have liked to see. But I'm with you. I mean, there is a possibility of being able to do it this way and break up the Inner Circle, and I do think that's ultimately what they need. The Pinnacle is a new group. They work well together. I still really love their work as a faction. So I would like to see that. I would like to see the Pinnacle stay together and do what they're going to do. But the Inner Circle, I think all these guys will benefit from not being part of this group anymore. Proud and Powerful, I think, do need to start getting feuds by themselves. And Sammy Guevara, I think it's time for him to start testing the waters as a potential main eventer at some point. Because he is, in my opinion, he has the tools. I think he is kind of he's like a more fiery Jungle Boy, right? Like Jungle Boy is really over because people, I think, really empathize with him and really see themselves a lot in him, and that kind of that stoicism and that kind of reverence that he shows when he's in the ring, I think is really effective. That's why I really like him. And Sammy Guevara is kind of the other side of the coin as a babyface. He has that same quality as Jungle Boy. He's incredibly athletic. He's really young, and they talk about how young he is. And so he has that same quality, but instead of being kind of stoic and reverent the way Jungle Boy is, he's a lot more fiery. He's a lot more intense. And obviously it's over if you hear the Double or Nothing. If you heard the Double or Nothing crowd when he finally beat Shawn Spears, Sammy is over. So, I think test the waters for him. And Hager, I don't know if he's going to return to Bellator and do more MMA or what his plan's going to be. He's the only one that I feel like would really benefit from the Inner Circle staying together, because having Chris Jericho be his mouthpiece, I think, is really beneficial to him.
For sure.
Let me ask, talking about Hager, he was the only one who made a direct challenge, and he challenged Wardlow in 2 weeks to an MMA cage match. Are you interested in seeing that match?
I'm more interested because of the spectacle rather than the match itself. The novelty factor is what really plays into this for me. Mm-hmm. I'm not really excited to see what they actually do in the match. I'm just excited to see how it goes down, whether it's a success or a total failure, or like how this craziness happens, you know?
Yeah.
It feels like, you know, when MJF told Cody Rhodes that the only way he would be willing to fight him is if he takes the 10 lashes to the back. It felt like one of those moments where you're like, what the hell is this? But, like, this could either be really good or really sucky, you know?
Right. It's
who knows? I mean, I don't really watch that too much MMA, so I don't know how successful he is in that world. So I don't know whether that's going to play into this match. Obviously, people know that he has that MMA experience, so he is going to dominate a good chunk of this match, regardless of who wins.
Yeah.
But it's going to be wild to watch because of the novelty factor. I feel like it's going to be a lot worse than when Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle did the same thing.
Yeah, because I think in the case of that, in the Samoa Joe Kurt Angle thing, it wasn't called an MMA cage match. They just both approached it like it was, and that was the story. And obviously, I mean, it's unfair to compare Hager and Wardlow to Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle.
Of course.
I mean, as good workers as they are, I mean, you're talking about two of the best workers of the last 20 years when you're talking about Angle and Joe. So what actually came into my mind first, and I'm glad actually you brought that Samoa Joe Kurt Angle match up, because that might actually be closer to what we see from this. But the first thing that came into my mind was the Lions Den match between Ken Shamrock and Owen Hart. That's the first thing I thought of. And I thought it was really interesting because that match, like, those two guys, I mean, obviously Ken Shamrock had the legit MMA experience, and Owen Hart was just great at everything he did. So those guys were able to play with that much smaller space in a very interesting way. If we got something like that here, where they actually fought in something smaller than a ring, that I think would be an interesting take, because these guys, I mean, they're big, powerful dudes. They're both heavyweights, whereas, you know, Shamrock and Hart are smaller. So they're able to use their athleticism. So if they do go that route, I'm with you, curious to see the spectacle of it. Like, I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen in the match. I don't know the quality that we're going to see. But I think your comparison to the Cody Rhodes lashing is an apt one, because it's just, I don't even care what it actually looks like. I just want to see the spectacle of it and the uniqueness involved with it. So my mind is open. And again, this goes back to, we talk about it every week, the trust that AEW has with its fans, that when they say something like this, all of us think, oh, okay, this could be really interesting. I'm excited to see what they do with this, because AEW so many times has done really unique things that we weren't expecting to see from situations like this, like the lashing of Cody Rhodes, which ends up being actually a great segment in my opinion. And that leads into now something like this, where when they say MMA cage match, we all say, all right, let's see what you can do. But I'm optimistic for it. I think a lot of people are. Speaking of Jungle Boy, he was also on this card teaming with Christian Cage. This felt like just a fairly obvious way to keep Jungle Boy on TV and show how good he is, which, I mean, that's fine with me. The more he's on TV, the better, in my opinion. He looked great. Christian looks great. Private Party, they now dress as like call center workers with the khakis and the polos and stuff, which I think is really funny. So, you know, and they're great. Private Party is great. I think their selling is awesome, and obviously just their athleticism that they bring in is fantastic. So I thought this was a fun match. I thought Jungle Boy almost killed Mark Quinn at the end of it when they went for the gin and juice and he caught him and he just kind of dropped him. It seems like Quinn is okay, so it must have looked worse than it ended up being. So that's good. But Jungle Boy, I mean, they're putting over the snare trap, so I can't wait to see him get Kenny in the snare trap. And it'll be really interesting to see. There's a possibility, like, if AEW is ready to hotshot Jungle Boy right now, I could definitely see a situation where he gets Kenny in the snare trap and Don Callis distracts the referee and Kenny taps. one of those. AEW doesn't really do that spot. I don't know if they've ever done that spot. Maybe once. And no, they did do it once, actually. I think Jon Moxley did it. Anyway, that would be really, if they do that, then that's kind of your indication that, you know, they view Jungle Boy as a champion within the next year, which would be great. I love Jungle Boy. And then the post-match here sets up Christian and Matt Hardy. That seems to be the feud going forward for them. So we do get some solid storytelling here. What did you think about this match?
Like the rest of the matches, it was decent. And nothing was, besides the end, nothing was way too mind-blowing. What I find pretty funny is the fact that Private Party are such good heel characters, but not necessarily heel wrestlers, right? So, to me, the best Private Party matches are going to be the super spot festy ones, or the ones where they fight established teams with heel tendencies. So, like, for example, their matches against the Young Bucks, their matches against the Lucha Brothers. Then when it comes to the super spot festy ones, the one I saw in person, Northeast Wrestling, back in September of 2019, it was them against Insanely Rude and the Main Street Posse. All amazing teams. Can't say enough good things about them.
That sounds like a great match. Wow.
Right, yeah. Definitely check it out. I believe it's on High Spots Network. But, yeah, so compare those matches to this. It's a weird dynamic. Making them the clear bad guys and having them do the bad guy mannerisms, but then not having their in-ring work necessarily reflecting that. And so I think they could do more to be more heelish, I guess. I think something that I've recently come to understand I don't like is when wrestlers do the whole heel shtick, but then their wrestling style doesn't reflect that, you know? So I think Private Party could work on that a little bit, but overall, they're still an excellent team, excellent wrestlers on an individual level. Their singles matches have been pretty great. Now, Christian Cage and Jungle Boy, that's a unique dynamic. That's a cool setup right there. They clearly have at least some chemistry, which is awesome considering that this is their first match tagging together. Right. Who knows if they're gonna do this ever again, but if this is the only time they team up, then I would call it a success, I guess. So, yeah, overall, the match was a bit weird at times. It definitely caught up at the end. It definitely ended up being a good match by the end. Just some things in the middle, some character things that I wasn't 100% sold on, I guess.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that, and I think Private Party, it doesn't help them that they're juxtaposed with the Young Bucks, who also were a very high spot babyface team, and the Young Bucks have totally changed their match style since they became heels, and we talk about it all the time because we have the statistics to help us, and we can see how the Young Bucks have changed their dynamic and how they've cut down on the dives and they've actually increased their double teams and they have more strikes and things like that. All these changes that they've made to their game to match their characters. So in comparison to that, Private Party looks like they haven't really changed their game at all. And so it looks weird in juxtaposition. I think there is a way that you can be a high spots team and still be heels. The only way that I think it really works is if your character is we're better than everyone because we can do all these high spots, and so you're like super arrogant about it. That I think would work. That's not exactly their character right now with the Hardy Family Office and everything, but I also agree with you. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that's kind of a nitpicky thing, especially if they're not. I mean, if they were going to be tag champions or something, then we'd have to talk about that. But for right now, to kind of be the muscle for Matt Hardy and just put on really fun matches, they can still do that. So, which is fine with me because they do put on fun matches. Kenny Omega cuts a promo on Jungle Boy, and to me, just by virtue of Kenny talking about him specifically, this gives me more of a reason to be interested in this match, because coming into the triple threat, Kenny's issues seem to be with Orange Cassidy, right? So at Blood and Guts, Kenny specifically cut a promo on Orange Cassidy, didn't even mention Pac at all, even though at that time, we knew that we were going to get the number one contenders match. So you would think that Kenny would cut a promo on both guys. He really just talked about Orange Cassidy. So with Pac being involved in that match, as great as it ended up being, the Double or Nothing triple threat, it still, from a story perspective, it kind of felt like Pac was the odd man out. It felt like this was a match between Kenny Omega and Orange Cassidy, and Pac was inserted in it. This now coming into Kenny Omega and Jungle Boy, just because Kenny referenced, talked about him directly, and, he did the mocking chant that goes along with Jungle Boy's music and everything, and does the whole Jungle Boy, Jungle Man, Jungle Champion thing, which is such a Kenny Omega thing to do. Like, if anyone else had done that, it would be ridiculous, but for Kenny Omega, he just says weird stuff like that, and it works. So I thought this promo was great. I'm really, really excited to see this match, both from an in-ring perspective, because Kenny Omega puts on phenomenal matches and Jungle Boy himself is a great wrestler, and also from a story perspective, because I feel like this is almost as clear a distinction between characters as we get. Kenny Omega and Jungle Boy are almost exact opposites in their characters. So I am really excited for this, and I think Kenny Omega and Don Callis cutting this promo really helped me get more excited for this title match. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. And the differences between Jungle Boy and Kenny Omega are so wild to me, because if we're being real, Kenny Omega's character is a little bit dorky. But
yes, it is.
But he carries himself in a way that, like, he still comes off as cocky and everything. Mm-hmm. Now, then you have Jungle Boy, who I don't know if he's, like, he seems like nice enough of a guy, based on what I've heard online, based on what I've heard from other wrestlers.
Yep.
But he carries himself as if he's someone who knows he's good, but doesn't necessarily have the confidence to be like, no, yeah, I deserve to be here. I'm going to be a main eventer,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think this match, if anything, can do him wonders, because he hasn't shown, like, loads of personality. He has a personality, but he hasn't shown loads of personality. I think this match could do good for him, because it will allow him, at least character-wise, show him that he could hang with the best of the best, I don't necessarily want him to become, like, a cocky guy, but, like, if he could inject some of that Luke Perry energy into him, I think that could be super beneficial to him.
Yeah, I'm definitely with that. And it is interesting, because I totally agree with you. He carries himself like someone who is inwardly confident, but he's almost hyper aware of how he could look arrogant, and so he's, like, compensating for that by being very humble and everything. And by all accounts, from people that I've talked to that know him personally, that's how he is as a person as well. That he's just is a genuinely nice human being, which is always nice. I mean, characters are characters, but it's always nice when it kind of bleeds over a little bit. So they always say that great characters are just your personality turned up to 11.
For sure.
And this certainly seems to be the case with Jungle Boy. This just seems to be who he is. And so, again, it just contrasts so well to Kenny Omega, who is so arrogant, and he's so... And the thing is, in both cases, it's deserved. Like, Jungle Boy is on this level, wrestling at this level at such a young age, that if he was arrogant, it would be deserved. And Kenny Omega is potentially the greatest wrestler that ever lived. And so his arrogance is also deserved. But in one case, Kenny Omega really shows it. And in the other case, Jungle Boy is so conscious about not showing it that he goes in the other direction. And so I think that those wrinkles in the character, again, can really be played up by Kenny Omega, who really understands this stuff. And, he'll just... like he's done with so many people, will put Jungle Boy on an even higher level, to the point where people are going to be clamoring for him to be in the main event. It's the exact same thing that happened with Hangman Page. Kenny Omega's done it to almost everyone that he's wrestled with in AEW. And so this match is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be awesome.
No, I'm super excited. I hope it gets enough time. I hope it's not just like a 12 to 15 minute thing. I mean, they could do that and it'll still be a great match, but I think this is one of those times where they have to give it ample time to show that Jungle Boy isn't going to lose super fast. He could hang in there, and to show that Kenny Omega has to put in a bit of extra work to beat this guy.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I agree. The women's match, Red Velvet against the Bunny. I don't have much to say about this. I think Red Velvet's great. I think she's a great wrestler. Having Big Swole and Kylan King with her, this must be a dark development or dark elevation. So I don't know if you can shed a little bit more light on that for me, but the match itself I thought was really good. I think the Bunny's fine. I think Red Velvet's great. So I don't know. Eventually Red Velvet will probably fight some women higher on the card, and based on what we saw in this match, she deserves it. I mean, she almost killed herself as well with that suicide dive, which, by the way, I think she does the best suicide dive of any woman I've ever seen. Like, she just gets such distance and such speed on them. It reminds me almost of Rey Fenix, where Phoenix can just, like, he can just fly 20 feet out of the ring. It kind of reminds me of that. It's so explosive, her suicide dives. Now, obviously, I would like for her to not almost kill herself whenever she does them. That would be ideal. But, I thought this match was good, and I think Red Velvet's great. So can you maybe shed a little bit more light on this grouping of her and Big Swole and Kylan King?
So I don't actually watch enough dark elevation to really give way too much insight as to this. I know this pairing happened shortly after the match with Shaquille O'Neal. But that's all I could really say. It started off with Big Swole and Red Velvet teaming up, then the trio teaming up against the Sea Stars and Vert Vixen, and then you have Kylan King and Red Velvet, and just these combinations teaming up against other competitors. I don't really know why they were paired up, to be honest. I think it's a good pairing, though, based on what I have seen of them. I definitely think, even though Red Velvet might not give off, like, leader energy, I guess, like, as if she's, like, the one leading everyone into battle, she's definitely the best of them all. So I think, but I still think it's cool to have these people, because each of the three are such distinct characters, definitely different breeds of confidence, I guess you could say. So the match itself, I thought it was fine. We've definitely seen better from both competitors. There's not way too much to comment on. If you ask me, I thought it was a good showing for Red Velvet. I freaked out when she did that suicide dive, because she just about scorpioned as she landed outside of the ring. Not good. Looks like it could have ended up on Ridiculousness, one of those things. Besides that, I thought it was a decent match.
Yeah.
The Bunny, I think, I like the Bunny as a character. Everything she's done character-wise from the beginning has been great.
Yeah.
But from a wrestling standpoint, I don't think she's, like, the best ever. I guess I have no real complaints about her. Mm-hmm. I think she's good enough, and Red Velvet definitely elevated her to some extent. Yeah. Overall, if the point of the match was to elevate Red Velvet and make her look good, then they accomplished that, and they did what they had to do.
Yep.
So I guess that's the best way to leave it off.
Yeah, I totally agree. More Red Velvet on TV is good for me, and I think she's great. I think she deserves some more some more TV time as she gets more seasoning and gets a little bit more experience. So we will finish here with talking about Britt Baker's championship celebration. This is an interesting one because it seemed like watching it, I thought that a lot of people would have a lot of opinions about this. But if you go over to our Dynamite roundtable right now on ProWrestlingMusings.com, only 2 people ended up actually weighing in on this, and I believe you were one of them.
Yes.
Am I remembering? Okay, that's what I thought. This I actually thought was pretty good. I think people's issue with this championship celebration seems to be that it's almost like a PTSD type of thing, where people so many times we see the first act in a feud be the kind of catalyst around which the feud begins and remains the whole time, which sometimes is true. But in this particular one, Nyla Rose knocking the burgers out, everyone's like, oh my God, the feud's going to be around hamburgers. Like, no, it's not. It's Nyla Rose being annoyed that she's even in the ring dealing with this stuff, which, to be fair, is kind of true. Why did they invite Nyla Rose to sit here as she, the former champion, is watching this new champion get more recognition than Nyla Rose ever got when she was the women's champion? So to me, the feud is not going to be about hamburgers. Okay,
Right.
that's something that she did. But what I really liked was Britt Baker. She's so over, obviously, and people just love her. And so it doesn't so much work for a heel. You shouldn't have a heel being cheered. But I think it works if Britt basically just kind of ignores it. She just is who she is. And if people are going to cheer her, then people are going to cheer. There's kind of nothing you can do about that. But I loved Britt's line where, she said there's burger coupons under your seats because Chris Jericho had given everyone the Inner Circle t-shirts, the Stadium Stampede ones, which is really sick, by the way. That is awesome that he did that. But she said it's all under your seats, and then she goes, no, I have them right here because you didn't do anything. I did everything, which a heel would think that. A babyface would thank the fans. A heel would say, you didn't do anything, which, again, is kind of ignoring the fan reaction because the fans did cheer her the whole time. But this is her totally ignoring that and saying, yeah, I did everything in the ring. I'm the women's champion. You're not. And so to me, I liked this. I think Britt is a tremendous promo. Best in the women's division, I think, in my opinion, right now. And her first feud against Nyla Rose, these two have fought before. I think it should be a lot of fun. I don't think there's any chance that Nyla wins the championship in this feud, but you got to put Britt Baker over, and basically using the monster of the women's division to do it feels like a pretty good start in my opinion. You reading the Dynamite roundtable, you had some mixed feelings on this as well. So can you elaborate a little bit on what you thought about the championship celebration?
Yeah, I thought the celebration itself was fine. I thought it was actually pretty funny at times. My main worry, maybe not complaint, but my main worry is pretty much the fact that Britt Baker is going to be the de facto face of the feud, even though clearly she's going to be doing the heelish thing, right?
Right.
Nyla Rose has spent her entire AEW career as the bad person, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know what she was doing before AEW, but yeah, she definitely has played an awesome heel in AEW.
Yep.
So I think the best way for her to go into this feud is to almost play an anti-hero, not fully becoming the face in this situation. I don't know that she's capable of that. Maybe she is. I mean, based on what I know about her, she's definitely an inspiration. She definitely seems like a nice person outside of the ring, So I think there is a lot she could tap into to be an effective face in this situation, or at least an anti-hero. Like you said, it definitely felt like she was more annoyed about what was happening than anything. So I think I don't think she should play into that for way too much longer. I think if she continues on that path a little bit before really jumping in and getting aggressive, I think that could be pretty effective to establish her as a credible contender. Not that she isn't a credible contender, considering the fact that she's been champion already.
Yeah.
I don't think the segment did Nyla Rose to how do I say this? I don't think the segment was way too effective to establish Nyla Rose as a formidable challenger. I think that they're going to have to lay more groundwork.
Uh-huh.
But in terms of establishing Britt Baker, I thought that it was a pretty great time, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was really fun from Britt's perspective. And, I mean, anytime you put a mic in front of her, I think good things are going to happen, which is great, because AEW champions basically this whole time have been that on the male side. Jon Moxley is the poster boy for, just let him talk, and it's gonna be great. I mean, Moxley's worst promo is like still a fun time, still a great promo to listen to. And
still
same with Jericho.
Much better than most people.
Exactly. And same with Jericho as well. And now Kenny is doing the same thing with Don Callis. So to put Britt Baker into that category where I think she has that same quality, like just anytime she speaks, I want to listen to it. That is a real credit to her and how much work she's done to improve her promo game. Booking someone as big as and strong as Nyla Rose as a babyface is difficult because we're just so used to seeing that person as heels, right? Like Vader never really worked as a babyface. And just in the whole history of monsters in wrestling, it's very difficult to make them baby faces just because of what they look like. It's hard to empathize with someone who's that big and that physically imposing. So to me, I think the best way to do it is the Batista Triple H route that was done a few years ago. That to me is the closest. Forget closest. That was a situation where someone who is like just a physical monster who becomes a really beloved babyface based on the work of the heel that he was going up against. The work of Triple H and Ric Flair in that feud made Batista the babyface, even though, no one is ever going to boo Ric Flair, obviously, and Triple H was getting cheered by crowds at that time. So to me, I view this as a very similar situation. Nyla Rose doesn't have to do much. She doesn't have to cut super impassioned babyface promos. She doesn't have to do that. She doesn't even have to fight as the babyface in matches. And we actually have evidence of that because that's actually pretty similar to what Cody Rhodes has done in his time in AEW. He doesn't fight like a babyface, but he is a babyface. And when matched up against great heels like Brody Lee and MJF and Chris Jericho, it works really well. So Nyla Rose can basically be the same thing and then put the onus on Britt Baker to be the heel and essentially make Nyla Rose the babyface in that situation. I don't know if it would work just as well because, we didn't know it at the time, but obviously Batista would turn out to be a Hall of Famer and a huge movie star, and it turns out he has all this charisma and everything else. So, I don't know if it will work as well with Nyla Rose because I don't know if she's going to be a movie star in 10 years or whatever. But I think that's the template that they should follow. This is going to be Britt Baker's job to make Nyla Rose the babyface in this feud, and I think, given Baker's work in the past, I think there's no question that she can do that. I think she is. I hate to make this comparison, and maybe I'm overstepping a little bit, but I think she right now is as good a heel as Triple H was back then. I really, really do. Her promo work and everything, I think, is on that level.
It's a unique situation for sure. I'm not sure I would go that far. And the situations are totally different too, because I think the reason why the Batista Triple H rivalry works so well, even though Triple H was getting cheered a bit, was the fact that Triple H had been on top for so long. Obviously, you have the Reign of Terror from 2002 to basically WrestleMania in 2005.
Right.
So, of course, that that first big moment where Batista does the thumbs up and then the thumbs down, that was so impactful because that's when people really felt like Batista could possibly end this.
Yeah.
In this situation with Britt Baker and Nyla Rose, you don't have that because even though Britt Baker has been kind of like the top bad guy in the women's division for most of the pandemic era of AEW at least, she only just won the championship. So I'm not sure that template is exactly applicable here. I think the same general sentiment could work, but you can't go all out. You shouldn't go all out with that because the circumstances have to be so perfect in order for everything to work as effectively as that. So if they do go down this route, I hope that they spin it in their own way, that it's not so obvious that they're trying to copy that essentially.
Yeah. No, you make a really good point that a lot of that was real life animosity towards Triple H and you know how unbeatable he had been during the whole reign of terror during that whole time. And so you're definitely right. It's not exactly applicable because at the end of the day, people were really rooting for Batista to win the title, and in this case, no matter how good Britt Baker is in the build-up, ultimately no one's going to be rooting for her to lose the title at this point. And you do need that in order for a really great feud. Just in general, you need the fans to really desperately want someone to win, and preferably the babyface. So, I don't think it'll be on that level. I mean, that's an all-time type of feud, you know, and obviously that moment of Batista doing the thumbs down and everything is a moment that, you know, everyone still talks about 15 years later. So I don't think it's going to be on that level, but just in terms of how do you make someone who physically doesn't look like a babyface become a babyface, the general template is to just let the heel do it. You know, let the heel be the one that everyone reacts towards, and then eventually that will start rubbing off on the babyface. Ultimately, I do think that from Britt Baker's perspective, her great feuds are going to be with more solidly babyface wrestlers. So I think her great, I mean, she already had a great feud with Thunder Rosa, so obviously there's that, and they could run that back with Baker as champion if they wanted to do that, and I'm okay with that given how great their matches were. Ty Conti comes to mind, maybe Red Velvet if you want to do that, Anna Jay when she returns, maybe Riho, like much more natural baby faces. Those are going to be Britt Baker's best feuds. So to me, this is an example of AEW basically saying, look, Nyla, when she steps into the ring, automatically is credible, just based on her size, based on her strength, and the fact that she's a former women's champion. She just is credible when she gets in there. So we'll give Britt Baker her first title feud against someone who is a really, really believable threat to her physically, to really establish Britt as being a champion, and then we'll start moving into those kinds of feuds where you start to wonder, is Britt Baker going to keep this championship? And that's going to be, I think, the more entertaining stuff to come from Britt Baker as champion. That's just my read on it.
For sure. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Well, this Dynamite, at the end of the day, I think was below average compared to their previous offerings over the last month or so. But I would think I think for everyone out there, I want to say that don't be so quick to start putting this, you know, trying to rank this in the greater, compare it to the greater Dynamites that we have to talk about. I think, you know, not every Dynamite is going to be, you know, the Double or Nothing go home, right? They're not all going to be of that level of quality, and that's fine. I think this Dynamite told the stories that they wanted to tell. Obviously, we have some criticism about some of those, but I think a lot of them as well make me more excited for some of the matches that we're going to see in 2 weeks, which seems to be AEW's next kind of bigger Dynamite show that's going to feature some more stuff. So, you know, whether you liked this Dynamite or not, I think if you didn't feel like turning it off for the 2 hours that you were watching, that's at least something. So, and I would expect next Friday, as they continue to build towards this show that's ultimately going to see Jungle Boy versus Kenny, presumably Hager versus Wardlow in an MMA cage match, and this other kind of crazy stuff that we'll see in a few weeks. If the idea is to build to that, I think at least this Dynamite did its job. And hopefully this podcast did its job in talking about this Dynamite for you. If we did, or I think more accurately, if we didn't, I'm sure you will let us know either on Twitter or over on the comments on YouTube. But wherever you are, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Google, wherever, make sure to either subscribe or leave us a 5-star review or whatever is applicable to whatever platform you have to be using at the time. Ryan, thanks so much for being here, my man. Please tell the people where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter. My handle is somewhere in the bio or the description, I should say. I'll continue writing for Pro Wrestling Musings, roundtables, or whatnot, and I plan on doing the podcast more. So you'll hopefully see me here again. Maybe not way too soon, but you'll hear from me again.
Whether it's way too soon, I think, is dependent on each individual person. So we'll ask. Yeah, we'll ask them. I have been Griff from GA. Check out my personal YouTube channel over at General Admission Wrestling, and while you're there, check out our Pro Wrestling Musings YouTube channel. We got all kinds of cool stuff, and as well as some other cool stuff that's also coming that I don't want to tell you much about right now, but you will see it very soon. Thank you so much for joining us here once again. We will see you next time with the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. We appreciate you.